Fellow Africans, before we speak of the wounds that now bleed in the heart of Kenya, we must first honor the spirit that built its name, a spirit forged in the crucible of struggle, hope, and vision. Kenya has long stood as a symbol on this continent, a nation whose story inspired millions. From the days of independence, through the forging of a multi-ethnic democracy, to becoming one of East Africa's most dynamic economies, Kenya was not just a country, it was a promise that democracy could take root in African soil and flourish, even amid diversity and challenge. For decades, we have looked to Nairobi and Mombasa as centers of cultural vibrance, innovation, and continental dialogue. Kenya's athletes have carried the nation's flag with pride across the world. Its entrepreneurs have built hubs of technology that rival the global stage. Its people have embodied the resilience and brilliance that define the African spirit. That is why what we see today shakes us so deeply, because when a house built on hope begins to crack, the tremor is felt far beyond its walls. Today, the streets of Kenya echo with chants not of celebration, but of frustration. From Nairobi's crowded avenues to the rural villages, where the soil is rich yet pockets remain empty, the people have risen in protest. Protests born from years of mounting discontent. These protests began with anger over proposed tax hikes in June 2024, but they have evolved into something much larger. A people's reckoning with a system they feel has betrayed them. We speak here not of chaos for chaos's sake, but of a cry for dignity, opportunity, and justice. A cry that has been met, not with open dialogue, but with tear gas, live bullets, and a deepening divide between ruler and ruled. Over the past year alone, more than 100 lives have been extinguished in this struggle. Each death is not a statistic, it is a shattered family, a silenced dream. A 12-year-old girl in Kiambu killed by a stray bullet inside her own home. A young masked vendor, Boniface Karayuki, gunned down at point-blank range during a peaceful rally. The death of blogger Albert Ojwang in police custody, with bruises and head trauma contradicting official claims of suicide. These are the names and faces behind the headlines. Human lives that remind us this is not merely a Kenyan problem. It is an African problem. Because when the right to protest is crushed, when leaders answer grievances with violence instead of vision, the precedent spreads like wildfire across borders. Kenya's current turmoil forces us to confront a painful truth that no nation, no matter its history, is immune to the erosion of trust between its people and its government. And when trust erodes, it is not only a political crisis, it is a moral crisis. We must therefore speak and act, not to shame Kenya, but to save the promise that Kenya once represented for all of Africa. For if the beacon of democracy in East Africa dims, the darkness will not stop at Kenya's borders. It will creep across the continent. There comes a time when silence becomes complicity. Today, we face such a time. The blood that stains the streets of Nairobi is not the concern of Kenya alone. It is the concern of every African who believes in justice, dignity, and the sanctity of human life. When the state, which exists to protect, instead becomes the hand that harms, then we must act as one continent, as one family, to demand accountability. That is why I stand here, without hesitation, to call upon the African Union, the guardian of our shared values, to launch an immediate, impartial, and thorough investigation into the actions of President William Ruto's administration in response to these protests. This is not a matter of political rivalry, nor is it an attempt to dictate Kenya's affairs from the outside. It is the fulfillment of the African Union's solemn duty to protect the rights and lives of Africa's people. Wherever they may be under threat, the allegations are grave, and they are many. Reports from human rights organizations, journalists, and the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights detail the use of live ammunition against unarmed citizens. They speak of extrajudicial killings, citizens executed without trial. They tell of young activists and community leaders abducted in unmarked vehicles. Their families left to wonder if they will ever see them again. They reveal directives, chilling in their clarity, from the highest office, instructing security forces to shoot protesters in the legs, to break their bones in the name of maintaining order. These are not the hallmarks of a democracy. They are the warning signs of authoritarianism, and we cannot, as Africans, look away. For if we ignore the cries of the Kenyan people today, who will hear our cries tomorrow? Some will argue, as they always do, that such an investigation would violate Kenya's sovereignty. To them I say sovereignty is not a shield for brutality. Sovereignty is a sacred trust between a nation and its people. A trust that is broken the moment the government turns its guns on those it is meant to serve. The African Union was not created to be a silent observer while its member states descend into repression. It was created to stand as the collective conscience of our continent, to intervene when justice is in peril. Therefore, I demand that the AU deploy a fact-finding mission composed of independent experts from across Africa. Experts who answer not to individual governments, but to the truth. This mission must investigate the use of lethal force, the documented cases of abduction, and the treatment of those in custody, and when the truth is found, it must be laid bare for the whole continent to see. No secrecy, no excuses. If the African Union fails to act, we will send a message that the lives of African citizens can be trampled without consequence. But if we act decisively, we will show the world that Africa will no longer tolerate impunity, not from foreign powers and not from our own leaders. Let us speak plainly. The right to protest is not a privilege granted by governments at their convenience. It is a birthright of every free human being. It is the voice of the powerless breaking through the walls of indifference. It is the heartbeat of democracy. And when that right is attacked, democracy itself begins to die. This is not my opinion. It is enshrined in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, a document signed and ratified by our nations as a binding covenant. Article 11 declares that every person has the right to assemble freely with others. Article 4 affirms the right to life, that no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of it. These are not mere words on paper. They are promises we made to each other as Africans. They are the moral spine of our continental identity. Yet in Kenya today, we see these sacred promises trampled underfoot. Citizens exercising their right to peaceful assembly have been met with riot shields, tear gas, water cannons, and worse, lead ammunition. Instead of dialogue, they have been greeted with directives to shoot to maim, to break the bodies of those who dare to raise their voices. These are not acts of governance, they are acts of war against the people. And I ask, when did it become a crime to demand fairness? When did it become treason to ask for dignity? When a young man holds a placard instead of a weapon? When a mother marches for her children's future? When students raise their voices against injustice? These are not threats to the nation. They are the lifeblood of it. For a government that fears the voices of its people has already lost its legitimacy. Some will say, but protests cause disruption. They disturb order. Yes, they do, and they must, for protest is the language of those who have been ignored too long. It is the alarm that sounds when the house of justice is on fire. The task of leadership is not to silence the alarm, but to put out the fire. If Kenya, a nation once celebrated for its democratic progress, now teaches its people that the price of dissent is death, then the message will echo across Africa that to question power is to gamble with your life. And that is a message we cannot allow to stand. The right to protest is not the enemy of stability, it is its safeguard. For without peaceful channels to express grievance, frustration festers in the shadows, where it can explode in ways far more dangerous than any street demonstration. This is why the African Union must defend this right with the same urgency we would defend our borders. If we permit the crushing of peaceful protest in Kenya today, we open the door to its crushing elsewhere tomorrow. And soon, no African will be able to speak truth to power without fear. That is not the Africa we dreamed of, and it is not the Africa we will accept. A wise elder once said, "When the roots are diseased, the leaves will wither no matter how much you water them." The unrest in Kenya did not grow overnight. It is the fruit of years, even decades, of economic injustice, unkept promises, and the slow erosion of public trust. Let us remember, President William Ruto rose to power in 2022 on the wings of a powerful message. He called himself the champion of the hustler nation, the voice of the ordinary Kenyan, the defender of the poor, the one who would bring down the walls of corruption and open the gates of opportunity. Millions believed him. Many voted for him in hope, believing a new dawn was possible. But hope, when betrayed, turns to anger. And betrayal is what many Kenyans feel today. Instead of policies that ease their burdens, they have seen aggressive tax hikes, swelling public debt, and economic decisions that seem to benefit the few at the expense of the many. The infamous Finance Bill of 2024 proposed taxes on essential goods, even bread, the symbol of daily survival, and mobile money transfers, the lifeline of small business owners and the poor. Such measures struck not at the wealthy elite, but at the very hustlers Ruto promised to uplift. The outrage was immediate and fierce. Kenyans saw these policies not as reform, but as betrayal, proof that their government was out of touch with the struggles of its people. When public pressure forced the withdrawal of the bill, another wound was laid bare: the deep disconnect between the rulers and the ruled. The economic strain is not abstract, it is lived every day. Youth unemployment remains at staggering levels, over 35%, leaving a generation of educated, talented young people stranded without meaningful work. The cost of living continues to rise while wages stagnate. For many, dreams of building a better life are being crushed under the weight of debt, inflation, and dwindling opportunity. Add to this the perception, and in many cases, the reality, that corruption still thrives at the highest levels. The cancellation of a 2,000 billion controversial deal to hand over control of Kenya's main airport to a foreign conglomerate happened only after massive public outcry, reinforcing the belief that the government's instinct was to serve elite and foreign interests before the public good. The people of Kenya are not protesting simply because of one bill or one policy. They are protesting because they feel invisible in their own country. They are protesting because they were promised bread, but given stones. And when bread is taken from the mouths of the people, when their future is mortgaged without their consent, they will take to the streets, not as criminals, but as citizens demanding their rightful share. To address this crisis, we cannot treat the symptoms alone. We must heal the roots. That means ending corruption, investing in youth employment, ensuring fair taxation, and putting the needs of ordinary Africans before the profits of the powerful. For if a government's economic policies starve its people, no amount of security force will keep the peace. Hunger always finds its voice. The winds of change on our continent are not carried by politicians or generals. They are carried by the youth. They are the restless heartbeat of Africa, the relentless drum that cannot be silenced. And in Kenya, it is the youth who have filled the streets, not for glory, not for chaos, but for the promise of a future that belongs to them. Consider this truth: Africa is the youngest continent on earth. Over 60% of our people are under the age of 25. This is not a statistic. It is a revolution waiting to happen, for good or for ill. Our young people are educated, connected, and fearless. They navigate the world through the lens of their smartphones, drawing knowledge and inspiration from across the globe. They know the wealth buried in our soil, the power in our markets, the beauty of our cultures. And they know that these treasures too often end up in the hands of the corrupt, the foreign, and the unaccountable. In Kenya today, the protests are largely leaderless, organized through social media, and driven by young people who have lost faith in traditional political structures. This is a new kind of activism, decentralized, unpredictable, and impossible to crush with the old tools of censorship and intimidation. This generation does not wait for permission to speak, They demand to be heard. But here lies the danger and the opportunity. If we, as leaders, refuse to listen to this generation, if we try to suppress their voices, we will not only alienate them, we will drive them into the arms of despair, extremism, or apathy. A generation that loses faith in the ballot may one day turn to the bullet. And when that day comes, no amount of military might will restore the peace. We must, therefore, treat the voice of the youth not as a threat, but as the compass that guides our policies. This is why I call for the African Union to establish a permanent Youth Advisory Council, a body of young representatives from across our continent who will sit at the table where decisions are made. Let them shape policy not as tokens, but as partners. Let them speak to presidents and prime ministers with the authority of those who will inherit the consequences of every choice we make today. This council must be more than symbolic. It should have the power to mediate in moments of crisis, as in Kenya now, bringing government, opposition, and civil society together under one roof to chart a peaceful path forward. It should be the bridge between the streets and the state, between frustration and reform. And solidarity must extend beyond words. African nations must stand with Kenyan youth, not just in spirit, but in action. Let us share strategies for youth employment, open our borders for collaboration, and commit to investments that create opportunity rather than dependency. For the truth is this, the youth of Kenya are not only fighting for themselves. They are fighting for all of Africa. And when they win, we all win. But if they are silenced, if their hope is crushed, the silence will not be contained within Kenya's borders. It will spread like a shadow across our continent. Speeches alone will not heal Kenya. Declarations, no matter how passionate, will not bring back the lives lost or erase the scars of injustice. What Kenya needs now, and what Africa must deliver, is action. Clear, coordinated, decisive action. And no institution is better placed to lead that action than the African Union. The AU was not created to be a ceremonial body that meets twice a year and issues polite statements. It was born from the struggles of liberation, from the determination of our forefathers that Africa would stand united against all threats, whether from foreign powers or from injustice within our own borders. Today, that test has come again, and the AU must rise to meet it. First, the African Union must take the lead as mediator between the Kenyan government, the protesters, the opposition, and civil society. This is not a conflict that can be solved by force. The longer violence continues, the deeper the wounds will cut into Kenya's social fabric. Mediation is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength, the ability to bring opposing sides to the table and craft a path forward where all can walk without fear. But mediation must be backed by the power of truth. That is why I call for the AU to deploy a rapid response human rights monitoring mission. This mission should be ready to move within days, not months, whenever a member state faces unrest. Its role is to document abuses in real time, to gather evidence that cannot be erased, and to hold both governments and protesters accountable for their actions. In Kenya, such a team could have already prevented some of the bloodshed by shining an unblinking spotlight on the ground. Beyond the political crisis, we must confront the economic roots of the unrest. Kenya is not alone in facing crushing debt, rising unemployment, and spiraling living costs. These pressures, when left unaddressed, are tinder waiting for a spark. That is why I call on the AU, in collaboration with regional blocs like the East African Community, to create a continental economic solidarity framework. Under this framework, nations in crisis could access coordinated debt relief, emergency investment, and technical support for economic reforms that prioritize the welfare of citizens over the profit of the elite. We must send a clear message to the people of Kenya. Africa will not stand by while you suffer. We will stand with you, not as outsiders, but as family. And we must send an equally clear message to the leaders of Kenya. The time for repression is over. The time for dialogue is now. If the AU acts boldly, It will prove to every African that our continental unity is more than a slogan. It is a shield, a refuge, and a source of strength. But if we hesitate, if we let fear or political calculation keep us silent, then the idea of a united Africa will wither in the hearts of our people. Kenya's hour of trial is Africa's hour of decision, and the AU must decide to lead. The streets of Nairobi are not so far from the streets of Lagos, or Johannesburg, or Kinshasa. The anger of Kenyan youth is not so different from the frustration in Dakar, in Harare, in Cairo. What is happening in Kenya today could happen anywhere tomorrow. And it will, if we do not learn the lesson written in the tear gas, the blood, and the cries for justice. The lesson is this: you cannot build peace on the foundation of injustice. You cannot claim unity while feeding inequality, and you cannot silence a generation that has tasted the power of its own voice. Look around our continent. Across Africa, the same patterns repeat themselves. Leaders who rise on promises of reform, only to be swallowed by the machinery of corruption and self-interest. Economies rich in resources but drained by debt. Youth bursting with ideas but locked out of opportunity. Foreign powers that smile while signing contracts that strip our nations of sovereignty. If we do not break this cycle, we will pass it intact to our children, and they will curse us for it. That is why the Kenyan crisis is not only Kenya's fight, it is Africa's wake-up call. It tells us that the age of passive citizenship is over, that the young will no longer wait quietly for their turn to lead. They will take the future with their own hands. And it warns us that governments, which refuse to change, will be changed by the streets. But this moment is also an opportunity, a chance to prove that African unity is not just a dream in speeches, but a living force in our politics. Imagine an Africa where, when one nation's people cry out for justice, the rest of the continent answers, not with interference, but with solidarity. Where we send not soldiers to suppress, but mediators to heal, not loans with strings, but investments with dignity. This is the Africa we must build, and it begins with each of us as citizens, as leaders, as nations. It begins with the courage to speak truth to power, even when that power wears our flag. It begins with the discipline to see the humanity in those we disagree with, and the vision to put our children's future above our own comfort. So to the youth of Kenya, I say, do not lose hope. You are not alone. Your struggle is echoed in every corner of this continent. And to the leaders of Africa, I say, listen now, or you will hear the same chants in your own streets. The fire that burns in Nairobi can light 1,000 torches for change, or it can become the wildfire that consumes us all. The choice is ours, and history will remember what we decide in this moment. Let us choose unity. Let us choose justice. Let us choose Africa.